Story 1. The Left Behind Key. I keep telling myself the first bad decision I made that night was staying after I found the key. It wasn't. The first bad decision was thinking a place could be safe just because it looked expensive. Fresh paint, new cabinets, brushed steel fixtures, all that stuff. I didn't understand until later that something can be clean and still feel used, like someone already knew exactly how you'd move through it before you ever stepped inside. My name's Corin Mays. I was 31, new to the city, and so tired from hauling boxes up 4 flights that my arms were trembling when I set the last one down in the bedroom. I was renting a renovated 1-bedroom on Halden Street, 3 blocks off the elevated train, in a part of the city my coworkers kept calling up and coming. It smelled like wet latex paint and industrial floor cleaner, the kind janitors use in office buildings after hours. Every surface looked scrubbed and blank. White walls, gray floors, cheap recessed lighting that made the place feel more like a clinic than an apartment. I was there because my transfer went through fast and I couldn't afford to keep paying for a hotel. I didn't like being alone in unfamiliar places, never have, but I told myself one night was one night. Unpack the essentials, shower, lock the door, sleep. That was the plan anyway. The first thing that bothered me should have been small. Probably would have been small to somebody else. I was making up the bed and one of the floorboards near the closet lifted a little under my heel. Not enough to trip me, just enough that I crouched down to press it flat. When I did, I saw shallow carvings on the underside. Tiny marks, almost decorative, cut in rows. Not letters. Not numbers. More like the kind of repeated symbols you'd see scratched into old furniture. I checked the next loose board. Then another. Same thing. Every board I could pry up even a little had them underneath. Neat, deliberate, intricate. I remember smelling sawdust and old glue under the fresh finish, and hearing the pipes in the wall knock twice, then let out this long, rushing breath. I didn't panic. I'm good at not panicking. I do facilities compliance for a regional lab network. My whole job is looking at broken or questionable things and sorting actual hazard from cosmetic nonsense. I told myself exactly what I would have told any nervous tenant. Pre-existing damage. Renovation crew cut corners. Somebody left the original subflooring, refinished over it, figured no one would ever look underneath. Ugly, not dangerous. I said that out loud, because empty rooms make you want to hear another voice, even if it's just yours. Then I went into the kitchen and found the brass key. It was sitting right in the center of the counter like it had been placed there for a showing. Old brass, long stem, oval bow, heavier than a normal apartment key. There was a paper tag looped through it with string. The tag said, in blocky black marker, "Don't let them in." I actually laughed when I read it. Not because it was funny exactly, more because I was tired enough that a prank felt easier to process than anything else. Previous tenant joke. Something a super forgot to clear out. Some dumb viral scare tactic from college kids. I set it back down, opened a cupboard for a glass, and noticed there were no locks on the bathroom door. Not a broken lock. No place for one. Fresh paint over a smooth plate where hardware should have been. In a supposedly modern renovation. That detail stayed with me more than the note did. I took a shower anyway. Hot water, steam, the smell of paint getting warmer in the bathroom. I kept looking at the door while I rinsed shampoo out of my hair because a room without a lock changes the way you stand in it. I got dressed fast. Sweatpants, old t-shirt, socks. By then the city noise outside had flattened into a muffled hum, like I was hearing traffic through layers of fabric. Inside the walls, though, the pipes kept ticking and rushing in a rhythm that sounded too close to breathing. I killed the bedroom light and went into the living room to plug in my phone charger. All the furniture was facing the bedroom door. Took me a second to understand what I was looking at. I only had 3 pieces out there. The narrow couch I'd shoved against the wall, the small chair from the desk set, and a boxed coffee table I hadn't assembled yet. Except the chair had been dragged to the middle of the room, the couch angled inward, and the unopened box stood on its side like a 4th seat. A loose circle, all of it aimed at the dark rectangle of my bedroom. I just stood there with my charger in one hand. My first thought was that I'd done it myself without noticing. Sounds stupid now, but fatigue does weird things. I was operating on coffee and adrenaline. I'd been in and out all day with movers, leasing staff, delivery people. Memory contamination, that's what I called it in my head. Bad encoding under physical stress. I put the chair back, pushed the couch flat to the wall, laid the box down, checked the front door deadbolt. Locked, chain latched, nobody there. I left every light on after that. It didn't help. About 10 minutes later, while I was opening a suitcase on the bed, I heard my name come through the vent over the dresser. Not loud, not dramatic, just a voice thinned by metal. Corin. I froze with one hand on a rolled-up towel. Then, after a pause that somehow felt polite, it said, "Don't go to the basement." I walked straight into the living room and looked up at the vent there like I was going to identify a speaker system. My explanation arrived fast, clean, almost automatic. Cross-vent transmission. Somebody in another unit, voice carried through the ductwork. Maybe kids messing around. Maybe somebody saying Corey or Warren or something close enough to my tired brain that I filled in the rest. The human ear does that. Pattern completion. Context substitution. I wanted that explanation so badly I almost accepted it. Then the brass key on the kitchen counter started to move. Not slide. Not wobble. Vibrate. Hard enough that the tag rattled against the stone top in a fast, dry tapping sound. I felt my stomach drop in this ugly mechanical way, like an elevator losing alignment. The key spun a quarter turn, stopped, then trembled again, faster, as if something on the other end was trying to pull it. I picked it up without thinking. It buzzed once in my palm. Not like electricity. More like a trapped muscle. The metal was warm. That was the point where rational explanation stopped being useful. I didn't have one that could survive contact with what I was holding. My hands had started shaking, not wildly, just enough that the paper tag made a faint crisp sound between my fingers. I set the key down again, harder than I meant to, and the scratching started at the front door. Soft, persistent, not from the hall side, from the inside. I backed up until the backs of my knees hit the couch. The sound was low on the door, maybe a foot off the floor, like fingernails or something metal lightly testing the paint. Scratch. Pause. Scratch, scratch. I kept staring at the deadbolt, waiting for it to turn. My mouth had gone so dry I could taste dust from the boxes. Then the vent above me said my name again. This time it was my own voice. Corin, it said. Exactly like I would have said it if I were trying not to wake a sleeping person. Don't answer it. The scratching stopped. I don't know how long I stood there, but I know I was holding my breath because when I finally inhaled it hurt across the center of my chest. I took my phone out to call the building's emergency line, and there was no service. Not low bars. Nothing. The Wi-Fi I'd set up an hour earlier was gone too. I tried anyway. Call failed. Again. Failed. I went to the bedroom window, shoved it open, and cold city air spilled in carrying fryer grease. Wet concrete, sirens somewhere far off. Below me the fire escape cut down the side of the building in black metal angles. For floors. Doable. The scratching came back, faster now, and something knocked once against the door from the hall. I made myself walk toward it. Not because I was brave. Because part of me still needed to prove there was a person out there. A prank, a trespasser, anything with a shape I understood. I moved as quietly as I could, key clenched in one fist so tight the edges dug into my skin, and looked through the peephole. I saw myself. Same height, same dark t-shirt, same stupid sweatpants with the bleach mark near the knee. My face, or something close enough that my brain accepted it before it rejected it. The hair was damp the way mine still was from the shower. The expression was wrong, though. Too still. Too pleased. It was holding a brass key up between two fingers, a match to the one in my hand. And it was smiling without any sign of effort, like it had been waiting a long time to do exactly that. Then it mouthed, through the door, "Let me in." My hand opened on the key. It hit the floor and the sound snapped me out of whatever state I'd gone into. I grabbed the suitcase nearest the door, not because I needed the clothes, just because instinct makes you take proof your life is still yours, and I ran to the window. Behind me I heard the deadbolt start to turn. I know what that sounds like. That's the part that still bothers me. I know what my own deadbolt sounded like unlocking from the inside, and that was the sound I heard behind me even though I hadn't touched it. I climbed out onto the fire escape so fast I scraped both shins on the sill. The metal was slick with old rain and cold enough to sting through my socks. I half climbed, half fell down the first ladder. Somebody opened a window 2 floors below and yelled at me, but I didn't answer. My pulse was beating so hard in my throat I could barely swallow. When I looked up once, just once, I saw my apartment window still open and a figure leaning out a little too far, watching me without waving, without shouting, just following me with my own face. By the time I hit the alley, my legs felt loose, almost separate from me. I ran to the street, flagged the first cab I saw, and got in without checking the driver. I gave him the name of a hotel across town and only realized halfway there that I was still holding the brass key. I had no memory of picking it back up. I never went back for the rest of my things. The leasing office called the next day, irritated at first, then confused. They said the apartment was locked when maintenance checked it. They said no one had entered. They said there was no basement in that building, only a sealed sublevel for old mechanical lines. I broke the lease, lost the deposit, replaced everything I could afford to replace. The suitcase came with me. The key did too, though I threw it into the river a week later and watched the brass flash once before it disappeared. That should have been the end. It wasn't. I still wake up some nights with my hands cramped shut like I'm gripping metal. I still listen at hotel doors before I open them. And I still think about how calm that smile was through the peephole, like whatever was out there wasn't trying the wrong apartment at all. Like it had been checking whether I was home yet, and if I'd opened the door when it asked, there wouldn't have been anyone left to climb down the fire escape except the one already holding the other key. I quit telling people the whole story a long time ago, mostly because saying, "I saw myself in the hallway," makes everyone decide what kind of person you are before you finish the sentence. So usually I shorten it. I say I had a bad first night in a new city. I say I broke a lease fast. I say the place had issues. That's the clean version. The true version is that I still don't know who was on the other side of that door, or whether it needed permission, or whether the note on the counter was a warning from somebody who got out one move too late. And when I think about the scratching now, I don't think it was trying to get into my apartment. I think it was checking whether I was already all the way inside. Story 2. The studio apartment. The worst part wasn't the crawlspace itself. It was how long I managed to live next to it by turning it into a joke. That's what I keep coming back to. There are things your brain tags as impossible because the alternative would interrupt your whole life too much. Mine did that for weeks. It took soft breathing in the wall, homework in a dead language, and a door that never led outside before I admitted the apartment wasn't small in a normal way. It was small because something else was using the rest. My name's Lena Pike. I was 19, in my first semester at Northvale College, and I moved into a studio on the 3rd floor of an old brick building on Mercer Lane because it was the only place I could afford without taking another campus job. I actually liked living alone. I grew up with 3 younger brothers and a television on in every room, so the idea of one space that belonged only to me sounded perfect. The studio was cramped, sure, but in a cute first apartment way, at least in the daylight. One big room, a kitchenette along one wall, a closet with a warped sliding door, and a bathroom so narrow your knees almost hit the sink if you sat wrong. It smelled like dust that had been warmed up for years, stale tobacco buried in the paint, and something sweet underneath it all, like fruit going soft in a paper bag. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors talking clearly, even whispering sometimes, but I never saw them in the hall. The first week was normal college chaos. Orientation packets, cheap dish soap, carrying textbooks in from the bus stop, figuring out which grocery store had the least depressing produce. I was tired a lot, the way everyone is that first month, trying to act like they already know where they're going. At night, I'd lie in bed and listen to voices through the walls. Laughter on the left, someone coughing on the right, water running somewhere overhead. It made me feel less alone. Then, on the 4th morning, I rolled over and saw footprints on the ceiling above my bed. Not stains exactly. Prints. Small. Mud caked around the edges, as if a child had walked upside down over the plaster in wet shoes. I remember sitting up so fast I knocked my phone onto the floor, The prints started near the corner over the kitchenette and crossed the ceiling in a crooked line to the closet. There were maybe 8 of them, brown, drying at the edges, detailed enough that I could see the tread pattern. My first explanation showed up almost immediately. Leak from the floor above. Water finds dirt, seeps through, creates shapes your brain turns into something familiar. Pareidolia with better marketing. I even laughed once under my breath, which was mostly for me. That's not feet, I said. That's a stain trying too hard. I went to class anyway. All day I kept telling myself I lived in an old building and old buildings do ugly, embarrassing things. Pipes knock. Walls sweat. Plaster blooms with weird marks. The ceiling wasn't walking around. It was just damaged in a way that happened to look personal. By the time I got back that afternoon, the marks had dried lighter, and that helped. It helped enough that I unpacked 2 more boxes, taped a postcard over the light switch, and told my roommate from high school over the phone that city apartments are basically haunted by maintenance issues. I found the crawl space that night. I was trying to hang a sweater in the closet when the back panel shifted under my hand. It wasn't a proper wall. It was a sheet of thin wood with paint over it. When I pushed, it gave way just enough to show a dark gap behind it. Cool air came out, carrying dust and that sweet rotting smell. Stronger now. I used my phone light and saw maybe 3 feet of clearance leading to some kind of narrow pocket between walls. Bare studs. Old insulation. A strip of black space that bent out of sight. I hated it immediately. Not because it was creepy exactly. More because it made the studio feel unfinished, like there was an asterisk attached to my lease. Still, I told myself crawl spaces exist. Old buildings have dead zones, extra cavities, illegal renovations. The city is full of hidden little spaces no one bothers to seal properly. So I shoved the panel back into place and tried to forget it. That worked for almost 2 days. The next thing was my sociology assignment. I'd left the worksheet half done on the little table by the window before going to evening class. When I came back, it was completed in a cramped, careful handwriting that absolutely wasn't mine. Every answer was wrong. Not lazy wrong. Confidently, structurally wrong, as if someone had understood the questions but answered from an entirely different set of assumptions. There were words in the margins too, written in looping characters I didn't recognize. Not random symbols. A language, old-looking if that makes sense. The kind of script you'd see under museum glass. I stared at it long enough that the overhead light started pulsing with my heartbeat. Or maybe I just noticed it for the first time then. Bright, dim, not enough to flicker like a fault, just enough that every time my pulse climbed the room seemed to tighten a fraction. I went straight into problem-solving mode. Maybe I'd grabbed someone else's worksheet in discussion section. Maybe one of the girls from my floor had come by, thinking it was funny. Maybe I sleepwalked and copied something from a library book without remembering. I know how that sounds. I knew then how it sounded. But anxious rationalizing is still rationalizing. If you can come up with 5 bad explanations in a row, you can sometimes avoid the 6th one. I slept with the closet chair wedged under the knob that night. Around 3 or 4, I woke to a wet breathing sound behind the wall. Not snoring. Not pipes. It sounded like someone trying to breathe through thick, damp cloth. Slow intake, sticky exhale. Close enough that I could tell it was coming from the crawlspace side of the closet. I lay there in the dark with my blanket pulled up to my chin like I was 8 years old again, listening to it keep time with the radiator clicks. After maybe a minute it stopped. Then I heard one soft bump from inside the closet, like something leaning against the panel. By morning the chair was still in place. The closet looked normal. The breathing, I decided, had been vents. It had to be vents. Old building acoustics. Air pressure through wall gaps. That was the first release in the spiral, and I grabbed it with both hands. I started spending more time on campus after that. Library till close. Coffee shop after class. If I got home late enough, all I had to do was shower and sleep. But the apartment kept finding ways to feel wrong even when nothing obvious was happening. The neighbors' voices were too clear, and they repeated phrases. I'd hear the same laugh from the left wall on Tuesday and from the bathroom wall on Thursday, exactly the same length, same hitch at the end. No footsteps in the hall outside, ever. No doors opening. No trash by the stairwell. It was like living in the middle of a recording. One afternoon I came back with groceries and noticed the hallway felt longer than usual. I know how stupid that sentence is. Hallways don't lengthen. But I walked to my door, unlocked it, stepped inside, and somehow ended up not in my studio but in another room laid out exactly the same, except the bedspread was yellow instead of gray, and the air smelled strongly of vinegar. My groceries slipped in my arms and I actually yelped. I backed out so fast the bag tore. When I looked again, I was standing in my own kitchen with apples rolling across the floor. I sat on the tile for a long time after that with one bruised apple in my lap, building explanations and watching each one collapse. Panic attack, sleep deprivation, new medication, a weird architectural mirror effect. Wrong unit, same floor plan, momentary disorientation. That last one got me through the rest of the day. It didn't survive the next morning, when I tried to leave for class and open my front door directly into my kitchenette. No turn. No blackout. One step through the doorway, and there was my sink 2 feet from my face. I screamed then. Not a horror movie scream, just a short involuntary bark because your body doesn't know what sound to make when space cheats. I shut the door and opened it again. Hallway. I stepped through. Kitchen. By then my hands were shaking so hard the keys jingled like I was standing in the wind. I tried the bathroom. Normal. Closet. Normal except for the sweet smell, which was stronger. I called the building manager, a guy named Dennis who always sounded half asleep, straight to voicemail. I texted 2 classmates and told them I might be late. I didn't say why. What do you say? Sorry, my door keeps returning me to my own appliances. After about 10 tries, the front door finally opened to the hallway again. I didn't wait to see if it would stay that way. I ran to class without my notes, spent the whole lecture with my pulse thudding in my wrists, and came back that evening with my friend Nia because I couldn't make myself enter alone. That was the second release. A witness. Another person. Somebody solid to measure reality against. Nia took one step inside, made a face and said, "Why does it smell like old candy in here?" I almost cried from relief. We checked the ceiling together. The footprints were gone. We checked the table. My assignment wasn't there because I'd stuffed it in my backpack. We checked the front door. It opened to the hall 3 times in a row. Nia knocked on the neighbor's walls as a joke and no one knocked back. For half an hour everything looked stupidly normal. I felt embarrassed. Really, deeply embarrassed. Like I'd been turning the stress of college into haunted apartment drama, because I missed home more than I wanted to admit. Then Nia slid the closet panel aside. The sound hit us first. That same damp breathing, but layered now, as if more than one chest were working in the dark. My phone light and hers crossed in the gap and caught clumps of hair caught on splinters. Long hair, short hair, gray hair, child's ribbons tangled into it, all packed deeper inside. Not attached to a person we could see. Just there, matted into ropes along the boards. Nia whispered, "Lena, why is there stuff in there?" Stuff. She meant objects. I could see them now behind the first curtain of hair. A sneaker. A spoon. The corner of a backpack. A calculator with one cracked button. Things that were mine mixed with things that weren't. The blue mug my aunt gave me. One of my gloves. Paperback from my nightstand. All of it threaded into the dark as if the crawlspace had been slowly eating the edges of my life. We shut the panel so hard it cracked. Dennis finally answered when Nia called from her phone and used the words gas leak and liability. He came up 20 minutes later with a ring of keys and a face that couldn't decide whether he was annoyed or frightened. He knocked on the wall behind the closet. Hollow. Knocked farther left. Hollow again. He kept muttering that there wasn't supposed to be void space there. Not like that, not on that side of the floor. The sweet smell was all through the room by then, thick enough that I could taste it. Not fruit anymore. Something older. When he opened the front door to get his tools, the hallway outside wasn't my hallway. It was another corridor of studio doors, all identical to mine, stretching farther than the building should have allowed. Same brown carpet. Same weak overhead lights. Same numbers except they repeated. 312. 312. 312. Dennis actually swore under his breath. That snapped something in him. He went downstairs, came back with a pry bar and another maintenance guy, and started breaking through the closet wall while Nia held onto my arm hard enough to hurt. It took longer than it should have because there were layers behind the panel. Thin wall, then older plaster, then lath, then empty dark. The hidden space beyond wasn't a crawl space. It was an entire floor cut into pieces. Not a proper floor with clean hallways and finished rooms. More like the building had grown an interior nobody documented. Narrow rooms inside rooms. Studio after studio pressed together where no blueprint should have fit them. Some abandoned. Some full of piles of clothing and dishes and school notebooks gone soft with damp. Some occupied. I know that word is vague. I don't know a better one. There were people in there. Or at least shapes of people, blinking in the flashlight beams, hair over their faces, clutching things that had belonged to residents above. One woman had 3 different ID cards hanging from a string around her neck. Someone farther down laughed once, exactly like the laugh I'd heard through my wall for weeks. And the breathing, it was everywhere. The police came, then paramedics, then more people with clipboards and questions and careful voices. They led me and Nia out by the stairs, not the elevator. Dennis wouldn't look at me. For days after, the college put me in temporary housing while the building got shut down. They told us there had been unregistered tenants, structural concealment, years of complaints that never aligned. Lost items recovered. Missing persons reports being reviewed. Nobody said hair. Nobody said the repeating doors. Nobody said why the neighbors had sounded so close and never once used the hallway. I never moved back into a studio after that. Not even a nice one. I rent old houses with too many people now, the kind where someone is always clattering in the kitchen or arguing over the thermostat. I need doors that lead somewhere other than more of the same. And I still think about the hidden floor. Not just how long it had been there, but what all those people were doing inside it, and whether they started as opportunists looking for a place to stay, or whether the building kept folding people inward until they stopped trying to leave and learned how to breathe through the walls without being seen. I used to think privacy was the whole point of finally living alone. Now I think isolation is just a room waiting to be used by whoever finds an opening first. The apartment didn't feel evil. That's what still gets me. Felt available. Like it had been standing there for years with a thin painted panel in the closet. Waiting to see who'd move in with enough boxes, enough deadlines, enough pride, and just enough need to explain away the first sound from behind the wall. Story 3. The Farmhouse. I don't say this to sound brave. I say it because it's the truth. When I first heard my own voice in that kitchen, I assumed it was a man. A trespasser, a squatter, somebody who'd been watching me unload the truck and decided a woman alone in the country was worth testing. I had a whole framework ready for that kind of thing. I'd lived through storms, layoffs, one bad marriage, and 6 months in a trailer after a wildfire took my old place in Oregon. I knew what to do with human trouble. The problem with that farmhouse was that human trouble was the only explanation it bothered to give me at the start. My name's Tamsin Reed. I was 42 when I bought the farmhouse on Merrow Road, 2 counties past anywhere you'd call convenient. Cross-country move, voluntary, all mine. After 15 years of remote logistics work and city noise under my windows, I wanted quiet. Space. Porch. Soil I could actually put my hands in. The place sat in the middle of a cornfield, big and weather-dark, with a wraparound porch that sloped a little at the east corner and a barn leaning tired behind it. It smelled like hay, manure far off from another property, and old damp wood that never fully dried out. The wind moved through the corn in this constant mournful rustle, like fabric being pulled over rough hands. The only thing that struck me as odd at first was the windows. From outside, a lot of them seemed arranged wrong. From inside, I realized why. Nearly every one faced inward toward the square center of the house, a kind of covered courtyard or light well, instead of facing the fields. It made the whole place feel turned away from the world. Still, I loved it. First day, I was sunburned and filthy and happy. Boxes everywhere, radio on low, boots leaving dirt across newly swept floors. I kept thinking, this is mine. Finally. I was tired, but it was good tired. Late that afternoon, I went up to the attic looking for somewhere to stash winter coats and found a stack of old photographs in a hatbox near the rafters. Dust so thick it coated my fingertips. The photos showed the farmhouse in different seasons. Porch iced over, corn high, barn door hanging open. And in the pictures was me. Not somebody who vaguely resembled me. Me. My face, my shoulders, my habit of tucking loose hair behind one ear when my hands are full. In one photo, I was standing at the kitchen sink looking out toward the courtyard windows. In another, I was carrying a box up the front steps. Same blue moving blanket I'd used that day. Same dent in the metal thermos I keep in the truck. I sat back on my heels and stared until the attic smell of hot dust and mouse droppings turned my stomach. Then the practical part of my brain went to work. Previous owners' belongings mixed with mine during shipping. Somebody at the movers grabbed the wrong carton. More likely, someone had been in the house when I toured it and I'd forgotten. Photos can distort. Faces overlap. Once I decided that, I almost managed to believe it. I put the pictures back in the hatbox, carried it downstairs, and set it in the mudroom to deal with later. That's when I heard my voice from the kitchen. Not shouting, just talking in that distracted way I do when I'm working alone. "Those go in the pantry," it said. I walked in and saw a woman with my back, my height, my dark braid, calmly packing boxes I'd already unpacked. She was moving dish towels from the drawer into a carton marked linens, folding them neatly, humming under her breath. I stopped in the doorway and every muscle in my body went tight at once. Not panic yet. Preparedness. The kind that makes your hands feel steady because the fear hasn't caught up. "Hey," I said. She turned halfway. Enough for me to see my own profile, but flatter somehow, as if someone had built me from memory and missed a few angles. Then she took the box and walked out of the room into the hall. I followed immediately. Nobody there. No back door open. No footsteps. Just the kitchen clock ticking and wind rubbing the corn against itself outside. My explanation held for another hour. Intruder. Hidden access. Acoustics. I checked the doors. Locked. Checked the ground floor. Empty. Called the county sheriff's office and got told, kindly, that unless someone was actively on the property, there wasn't much they could do beyond log the concern. I didn't mention the resemblance. I said probable trespasser. I said isolated residence. I said I had eyes on signs of occupancy. Professional language. Controlled. Useful. That night, I slept with a camping knife on the nightstand and every light on in the upstairs hall. In the morning, the guest room was no longer a guest room. I'd stacked my books there the day before, and now they were gone. In their place was a half-made bed, my overnight bag unzipped on the chair, my toothbrush on the sill, as if someone else versioned my move and claimed that room first. Over the next week, it kept happening. I'd unpack the study, and the other self would settle in before I finished, leaving my pen uncapped on the desk, my sweater over the chair, my mug ring on the windowsill. I never saw her do it directly after that first time. I'd just enter a room and find evidence that I had apparently lived there already in a way I hadn't chosen. I fought it the way I've fought everything else. Systems, labels, boundaries, closed doors. I marked boxes in red grease pencil. I took photos before bed so I could compare in the morning. Sometimes the changes were obvious. Sometimes they were maddeningly slight. A lamp moved 6 inches. A coat rehung on the wrong peg. Once, in the bathroom, a handwritten note on the mirror in steam fog that said, "You already did this." My friends noticed before I told them why. Calls got strange. My sister asked why I'd phoned her twice in one day and told her the same story about the septic inspection. A friend in Seattle texted, "Are you messing with me? Because you just said you were selling the place." I hadn't called either of them. I checked my phone logs. Nothing. Landline, then, except I hadn't connected the landline yet. The thing that broke my confidence wasn't the mimicry. It was the realization that whatever was doing it knew more than my voice. It knew timing. It knew private references. My sister mentioned that I had asked about the cedar box our mother kept recipes in, a detail I hadn't thought about in years. That stopped me cold in the middle of the kitchen with a dish in my hand. My framework didn't cover that. A stalker could study habits. They couldn't borrow history that precisely unless I'd already given it away. I tried to leave for 2 days. That's important. I didn't just stay because I was stubborn. The first attempt ended with my truck failing halfway down the lane. Battery dead, though it had been fine an hour earlier. By the time I walked back to the house for jumper cables, my phone had no signal and one of the inward-facing windows on the second floor had a figure standing behind it, hand raised in a little wave. My face, my body, my flannel shirt. The second attempt was after sunset. I packed a duffel and made it to the porch before every light in the house came on at once behind me, each window glowing into the courtyard like 100 watchful eyes. Then I heard my own voice from every room, overlapping slightly out of sync. "Tamsin, don't go yet. We're almost settled." My throat closed so hard I couldn't swallow. I made it back inside because the fields were black and the corn was loud and I couldn't stand the idea of something wearing my voice behind me in the dark. That was the moment I understood helplessness isn't always being pinned down. Sometimes it's just realizing every available choice already belongs to the thing that's pressing you. The walls began moving after that. Not in a dramatic movie way. Slow. Architectural. The hallway outside my bedroom felt tighter each day. A dresser that used to fit cleanly against one wall scraped on both sides. Ceilings seemed lower in the pantry. Door frames kissed my shoulders where they hadn't before. I checked with a tape measure because I needed numbers, and the numbers didn't stay put. 2 inches gone from one wall by evening. 1.5 inches from another by morning. My chest hurt all the time then, from shallow breathing, from not sleeping, from the house teaching me there was less room than there had been yesterday. I kept trying to reduce it back to a solvable problem. Foundation shift, moisture warping, old house behavior, hidden mechanisms, gas, carbon monoxide. I bought detectors. All clear. Opened exterior doors. No relief, except most of the doors didn't feel exterior anymore. Even with fields outside, the house insisted on itself. It pulled your attention inward, toward that central square of dim open air where all the windows stared. The worst night came in the study, which had once been mine. I went in carrying a lantern because the power had started cutting in and out. The room was already occupied. My desk chair had been turned toward the window. The woman wearing my face was sitting in it, hands folded, looking into the courtyard. She didn't turn when I entered. "You can have the west bedroom," she said in my voice. "That one's easier." I could hear my pulse in my teeth. The lantern handle was slick in my hand. "Who are you?" She tilted her head a little. "You when it fits." Then the room groaned all around us. Not with settling. Something deeper. The walls flexed inward with a sound like a person drawing a long breath through old lungs. The window glass clouded from the inside. In every inward-facing pane across the house, shapes moved. Versions. Partial versions. Postures I'd used. Gestures I recognized before I understood why. The house wasn't hosting the mimic. The house was making it. Trying on identity until it sat right. That stripped away the explanation I'd been building for days. There wasn't a trespasser using the farmhouse. There wasn't even one double. The farmhouse itself behaved like a system designed to absorb whoever lived there and return an edited copy that could belong more completely than the original. The photos in the attic hadn't predicted me. They were rehearsals. I should say I escaped then, but that's not what happened. The house didn't let go, and I wasn't willing to vanish into whatever role it had prepared. So I stayed. Endurance sounds noble from the outside. It isn't. It's ugly. It's sleeping in one room because the others feel borrowed. It's writing your name on masking tape and sticking it to drawers, jars, mirrors, then waking up to see the tape gone and the handwriting copied somewhere else. It's calling your sister every Sunday at noon because routine is proof you're still the one making contact. It's pushing furniture back against walls that keep inching inward. It's hearing your own voice in the kitchen and refusing to answer it. I'm still here. That's the part nobody likes when I tell it. People want the clean decision, the sheriff, the moving truck, the end. But the house owns the deeds older than I do, and every time I almost manage to sell, something goes wrong with the listing, the photos, the paperwork, as if the place can prevent being described accurately long enough to keep me in orbit. So I live in one wing and fight for it. Room by room, day by day, windows cracked when I can, lights on where I need them, notes in my own pocket reminding me what I chose and when. What I don't know is motive. Why a house would need the identity of the person living in it so badly that it remakes itself around them and trims away the extra until only one version feels natural. And I don't know what happens when it finally succeeds. I only know the inward-facing windows make sense to me now. They were never meant to show the fields. They were meant to keep watch on the part of you the house hasn't finished learning yet. Story 4. The Retirement Community. If I told this in the order it happened, I'd sound foolish in all the predictable places. I'd sound like a man making too much of a welcome dinner, too much of paperwork, too much of the quiet in the trees. So I'm going to tell it the way I understand it now, which is as a set of pieces that only formed a picture after I got out. That's the thing about inevitability. It doesn't feel inevitable while you're walking into it. Feels courteous, organized, thoughtful even, right up until the pattern closes behind you. My name's Basil Kerr. I was 67 when my daughter convinced me to move into Juniper Glen, a retirement community tucked in a forested valley about an hour outside the city. After a bad fall the winter before and too much time rattling around alone in a split-level house I couldn't keep up with, it seemed sensible. Small cottage, on-site clinic, walking paths, people my age. I wasn't excited about communal living, but necessity makes even pride wear softer shoes. The place sat beyond a long private road lined with cedar and pine. No bird noise. That's one of the pieces. I wrote it down later because I didn't want memory smoothing it out. Wind in the trees, yes. Needles brushing each other. But no birds, no squirrels, nothing skittering. The cottages were identical, arranged in gentle curves around a central office and recreation hall. Everything smelled faintly of pine cleaner, fresh mulch, and something clinical underneath, hospital-grade bleach maybe, as if the whole place had been wiped down before visitors arrived. The first oddity appeared in the welcome packet. Not one thing, several. I found them later when I compared copies. At the time, I noticed only the meal schedule on the kitchen counter and the plate waiting by my door that first evening. Chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes, exactly what I'd been planning to make from the groceries in my cooler. I stood there holding my own potatoes in a produce bag, looking at the plate like it had interrupted a private thought. My neighbor across the lane, a woman named Denise, waved from her porch and called that everyone brings the same welcome meal, so no one has to cook on move-in day. Reasonable. Pleasant, even. I didn't want to be the new man who made everything awkward, so I smiled, thanked her, and carried the plate inside. Later, going through forms, I saw a list of residents and nearly laughed. Same first name repeated across cottages. Arthur, Denise, Marlene, Basil. Not just duplicates. Exact repeats with matching birthdays and overlapping medical notations. High blood pressure, knee replacement, shellfish allergy. I took my packet to the office the next morning and the woman at the desk, whose name tag read Cora, only smiled and said, "We like everyone to feel right at home here." I let it go because letting things go had become a survival habit as I got older. If you challenge every oddity, you spend all day feeling difficult. That was mistake number 1. The next piece was the schedule. I found it folded inside the drawer of the bedside table, crisp and typed. Not community activities. Me. Wake at 6:30. Bathroom at 6:40. Tea at 6:50. Porch sit, weather permitting, 7:15. Phone daughter, Sunday, 10 in the morning. Rest period after lunch. Evening medication. Lights out, 9:30. There were small deviations built in, allowances, as though whoever made it knew my habits but also knew I liked the illusion of spontaneity. It wasn't exact in a magical sense. It was exact the way a good observer is exact after watching long enough. I put it back and didn't mention it. Social avoidance, if you want a clinical phrase. I didn't want to look senile. Didn't want the office whispering that Basil in Cottage 9 was confused already. That's another piece. The place made self-doubt feel like manners. Over the next week, I started collecting things without admitting I was collecting them. duplicate menus with different dates, a maintenance slip referring to my cottage by another resident's name, a prescription envelope left in my mailbox addressed to me for medication I'd never taken. All of it small enough to question myself first. Meanwhile, the streetlights went off every night at exactly the same moment. Not dimming one by one. Off all at once, dropping the lanes and porches into a total dark so complete I couldn't see the line of my own railing. The first time it happened, I stood in the kitchen with my tea halfway to my mouth and listened to the forest press in around the glass. Then came the messages. Not phone calls at first. Little things. My television turning on to a static blue menu with white text that said, "Please remain calm." A soft chime from the wall panel by the door, followed by a woman's voice asking me to confirm sleep quality on a scale from 1 to 5. Once, just after dusk, the porch speaker crackled and said, "Basil, don't deviate tonight." Calm voice, not threatening. That made it worse somehow, like concern impersonating authority. I began taking drives into town just to reset my sense of proportion. Grocery store, gas station, pharmacy I didn't need. Each time I returned, the staff greeted me with a kind of rehearsed relief. "There you are. We were about to check on you." Routine is important. All delivered in those soft administrative tones that make resistance sound childish. 2 weeks in, I saw my father in the trees. Not literally my father, you understand. My father had been dead 12 years. But one of the workers moving between the cottages in the late afternoon had his shape. His stoop, the way he angled his face down before looking up. Gray work jacket. Gloved hands. He paused beyond my hedge and stared at my porch with an expression I knew in my bones before I knew I was standing. I went cold through the center of my body, not with fear yet, but with recognition so wrong it felt like a misfiring nerve. The next day there was a woman near the maintenance shed with my mother's haircut from the late 70s and her narrow shoulders in a pale coat. She didn't wave, just watched my cottage, then turned and disappeared between the cedars. At that point I should have packed and left. Instead I assembled evidence. That's the shameful, slow part. I needed confirmation strong enough that I wouldn't be laughed out of my own suspicion. So I started keeping notes. Dates. Times the lights went out. Names on envelopes. Which workers resembled which dead people and from what angle. I photographed the resident list. I copied numbers from utility panels. I even called the county assessor and asked innocent questions about property boundaries. Juniper Glen barely existed on the maps. The listed medical office was registered under a holding company with an address that led nowhere useful. The decisive piece came by accident. I woke just after midnight to tires on gravel and a soft metallic clanging. Not loud enough for emergency, just procedural. From my front window I could see 2 staff vehicles without markings parked by Cottage 4. No siren. No ambulance lights. The streetlights had already cut out, so the scene sat in portable white flood lamps that flattened everybody's faces. Several residents stood on their porches in robes, silent, hands folded or hanging at their sides. No one calling out. No one asking if their neighbor was all right. Then 2 workers rolled a long metallic box up the path. Not a stretcher. Not a coffin exactly. Something in between. Industrial, squared off, latches along the side. They guided an older woman from Cottage 4 toward it while speaking to her the way nurses speak during routine imaging. Gentle, efficient. She looked half asleep. When she saw the box she tried to pull back. Just once, and every other resident on the lane watched without moving. That silence was the clearest communication I got there. Silence as agreement. Silence as instruction. Silence as proof nobody expected her to come back the same. I didn't wait for more. I went to the desk drawer, took my notes, my keys, my folder of copied forms, and the little cash envelope I keep for emergencies. The office phone rang as I was putting on my shoes. I let it ring twice, 3 times. Then the porch speaker came alive. "Basil," the calm woman's voice said. "Return to routine." That was enough. I left through the kitchen door instead of the front, crossed behind the cottages in wet grass that soaked my socks, and got to my car without turning on a flashlight. The trees smelled of cold cedar and bleach drifting from the clinic wing. When I started the engine, lights came on in the office. I expected shouting. No one shouted. The gate at the road was open, as if they knew leaving late and frightened would do more damage than preventing it. I drove until I saw city traffic. Real traffic. Neon signs, fast food wrappers and gutters, a bus stop bench with gum under it. I checked into the first motel with a vacancy and slept in a chair with the room lamp on. The next morning I called my daughter and told her I was safe but not coming back for the furniture. Afterward, I laid everything out on the motel bed. The schedules, the duplicate resident lists, the misaddressed prescriptions, photos of workers in the trees. When viewed one by one, each item invited dismissal. Together they formed a system, not a home, not care. A controlled environment built to study decline, compliance, memory, routine, maybe grief. I don't know the exact nature of the experiment. I don't know whether the dead parent resemblance was deliberate casting, my own age-softened perception, or something worse. I do know the community communicated constantly, through packets, speakers, corrections, repeated names, meals chosen before I chose them. By the time I understood the message, I was already living inside it. I rent a small apartment in the city now. Too much siren noise. Bad parking. I love it. Still, I cover my webcam. I don't keep a predictable grocery day. If a neighbor leaves food at my door, I throw it out. And every few months I search for other retirement communities in forested areas with similar layouts and vague ownership chains. There are more than there should be. I think about the residents who stood on their porches and watched the metallic box go by without speaking. I used to assume they were passive. Now I think they were experienced. They knew the script because they had seen enough people leave routine and return to it changed. The question isn't just what Juniper Glen was doing. It's how many places are built to make that kind of watching feel normal, and how many people move into them because the brochure says safe, secure, understood. Story 5. The Fixer-Upper. The safe was hidden behind nursery wallpaper, and for a few hours I managed to turn that into a good sign. That's the part about me you need to understand first. I was always the one finding the upside. My wife used to say I could stand in a room with a leaking ceiling and call it a skylight with ambition. Most of the time that made family life easier. It made buying the house possible. It also let me walk past too many warnings until the meaning of them stacked high enough that I couldn't pretend anymore. My name's Owen Mercer. I was 38 when my wife, Mara, and I moved our family into an old Victorian on Bellwether Avenue at the edge of a small river town. We had a toddler, another baby on the way, and exactly the sort of optimism people carry into words like historic charm and fixer-upper. The house had deep porches, carved trim, high ceilings, pocket doors that still slid if you pushed them right, and little hidden nooks everywhere, the kind children turn into kingdoms. It smelled like old wood, floor polish, dust shaken loose by sunlight, and every now and then, something faint and sour under it, almost sulfur but not quite. At night, the radiators clicked and hissed down the hallway in a rhythm that made the dark feel occupied. Many of the mirrors in the house had been covered with thin white sheets when we got the keys. The seller's agent said it was just staging left behind. I believed her because believing easy things was how I got through expensive weeks. The nursery was the sunniest room upstairs. Front corner, pale yellow walls, original floorboards under new paint. I was pulling up one warped plank near the closet to fix a squeak when I saw carvings underneath. Tiny, careful symbols cut into the underside, one on each board, then another, then all the rest when I checked. Intricate little marks, almost like a private index. I remember running my thumb along one and feeling the edges catch skin. My explanation came instantly, smooth as ever. Old builder's marks. Lumber notation. Some forgotten system from a century ago. Weird, sure, but kind of beautiful if you were in the mood to call things beautiful. I put the board back and kept working. That first month in the house had all the ordinary chaos you expect. Paint samples, half-assembled furniture, Mara making lists on the fridge, our son Eli running from room to room naming spaces after animals because the house was so big compared to our old place. He loved the nursery corner most, the one between the radiator and the window seat. He'd sit there with blocks and talk to himself in whispers. We thought it was cute. The first time it wasn't cute was just after midnight on a Tuesday in late autumn. Eli woke crying, not the tired kind, not sick, just urgent. I went in and found him standing in his crib, one hand wrapped around the rail, pointing to that same corner. "Who's Nella?" he whispered. I asked what he meant. He pointed again. "She wants my room." I smiled because that's what I do when I don't like what something means. Imaginary friend. Overactive day. House noises turned into kid logic. I picked him up, his pajamas warm and damp at the neck, and told him nobody was in the corner. He pressed his face into my shoulder and kept looking past me anyway. It happened again the next night at the same time. And the next. Always the same. Just after midnight, crying, then pointing to the corner and whispering the same name. Nella. Sometimes with a little wave, like he was greeting someone who had already been there a while. I explained each repetition as a toddler ritual. Kids do that. They lock onto a story and replay it. They test adult reactions. They like the power of a word that changes the room. All true. That's the trouble with good explanations. They stay true even when they're incomplete. The next wrong thing didn't even seem connected at first. Mara was unpacking picture frames for the hall gallery, family vacations and grandparents, and the hospital photo from when Eli was born. She called me upstairs with that strained voice people use when they're trying not to alarm the kids. The pictures in the frames weren't ours anymore. Same frames. Same wall hooks ready. But behind the glass were sepia and faded color photos of children we didn't know. Different eras. Different clothes. One in a sailor suit. One in overalls. Two sisters in matching cardigans on the porch. All of them looking straight at the camera with the fixed, patient expressions children wear when adults are wasting their afternoon. On the back of one photo, in pencil, was written Bellwether House, Spring. I told Mara the obvious hopeful thing. Seller must have mixed boxes during staging. Maybe the previous owner's keepsakes got packed with our frames somehow. We both knew that made no sense because these were our frames from our apartment, but I kept going because optimism, once it becomes habit, doesn't quit just because reality gets rude. We put the photos in a drawer and didn't show Eli. Weeks passed. More house projects. More oddness. Always small enough in the moment. Radiator clicks that sounded almost like teeth tapping. Mirrors that somehow ended up draped again after we'd removed the sheets. The sulfur smell strongest at the foot of the nursery stairs. Once, coming home from the hardware store, I found the front door locked from the outside. That's the only way I can say it. Key in my hand, deadbolt turned, knob refused. Mara opened it from inside looking confused because she hadn't locked anything. Another time it happened while all four of us were on the porch. I shut the door to carry in a diaper bag, turned back, and the latch wouldn't give, as if someone inside had set every bolt. Still I kept sanding trim and patching plaster. Still I kept reaching for kind explanations. Old house settling, swollen wood, misaligned hardware, someone in the neighborhood messing around, a hidden spring in the lock, a child's sleep phase, boxes mixed up. The house wasn't threatening us, I said. It was old. Then I found the safe. I was stripping wallpaper in the nursery while Mara took Eli to her mother's for the afternoon. Behind one section near the corner, the plaster sounded hollow when my scraper knocked it. I cut carefully and exposed a little iron door set between studs, painted over so many times it looked grown into the wall. Inside were baby teeth. Dozens of them, each wrapped in yellowing tissue or tucked into tiny labeled envelopes. Alongside them were dates written in different inks and hands, and beside several dates were names that matched local newspaper clippings folded underneath. Not obituaries. Disappearances. Children missing from the area over decades, all connected by having lived in that house or houses on the same block before vanishing. I sat on the nursery floor with those envelopes spread around my knees and the room tilted. The sulfur smell was heavy enough to sting the back of my throat. That's when earlier moments started changing shape in my mind. Eli whispering to the corner. The replaced family photos. The covered mirrors. The carved marks beneath the floorboards, not random at all but intentional, repeated through the room designed for a child. Retroactive terror is realizing the memory has been dangerous longer than you've allowed it to be. I called Mara and told her not to come home yet. She heard something in my voice and stopped asking questions after the third one. I spent the next hour ripping up more nursery boards with a pry bar. Underneath, between joists, were little caches, buttons, hair ribbons, broken toy wheels, a metal charm bracelet with one tiny shoe hanging from it. Not trophies exactly, more like residue caught and kept. When Mara got back at dusk with Eli asleep in the car, we made a plan fast. Pack essentials. Leave that night. Stay with her mother. Call the police in the morning with the clippings and the teeth and everything else. It was a sane plan. It would have been our best plan 24 hours earlier. We loaded bags by the front door. Mara carried Eli. I grabbed the folder of clippings, my keys, and the diaper backpack. I opened the door and it didn't open. Same deadbolt. Same useless knob. But this time I could see the latch through the narrow gap. And it wasn't engaged. The door was simply being held shut from the other side by nothing visible at all. I went to the back entry. Locked. Same issue. Kitchen window painted shut. Side porch French doors immovable. Every exit answered with the same blank refusal, as if the house had waited politely for us to gather near the threshold before showing what it could do. Eli woke then and started crying. Not loud. Miserable. Pointing past Mara's shoulder toward the stairs. Nella's mad, he said. The radiators began clicking in sequence through the house, one after another, hall to landing to nursery, like someone moving room by room with patient mechanical steps. Mara's face changed in a way I'll never forget. Not panic. Recognition. She had finally arrived where I had been heading for weeks, the place where every generous interpretation runs out at once. I told her to take Eli to the car if I got any window open. She nodded, clutching him so tightly his little sock fell off and landed by the umbrella stand. I went back upstairs with a hammer and the pry bar. The mirrors in the hall were uncovered now. All of them. I hadn't uncovered them. In the glass, the nursery door behind me looked closed even though I knew it was open. I didn't stop to understand that. My hands were slick with sweat. I could feel my pulse in the joints of my fingers. Inside the nursery, the corner looked ordinary. That's what infuriated me. Same rug, same crib, same white curtains lifting in the radiator heat. Just ordinary enough to tempt one last excuse. Then something clicked beneath the floorboards directly under that corner, followed by a quick patter like small hard beads rolling over wood. Teeth. I knew it before I saw anything. I tore into the floor with the pry bar. Board split. Dust and old insulation burst up into my face. Beneath the joists was a narrow cavity lined with more of those carved symbols, every surface marked. In the hollow lay a slope of tiny white shapes, some old and yellowed, some newer, all packed into the dark like seed. The smell coming out wasn't sulfur anymore. It was old damp wood and something sweet gone rotten. The same smell we'd been pretending not to notice since move-in. That was the peak of it for me, not because of gore, there wasn't any, but because I understood the house all at once. Not literally, not in some blueprint way. I understood intent. Every cozy hidden nook, every nursery, every family porch photo, every lock that behaved only when departure became serious. The house had been arranged over generations to keep children in orbit long enough to take something from them. Maybe not life in the clean, official sense, but years, identity, presence. The vitality families bring into a place when they think they're building a future. Bellwether House wasn't cherished by history. It was fed by it. Mara shouted my name from downstairs. I ran back into the hall and the front windows cracked by themselves with a sound like gunshots. Hairline fractures spreading white through the glass. That gave me the answer. If the house used enclosure, I was done asking permission. I took the hammer to every window I could reach. Glass burst outward into the night. Cold air slammed through the rooms. Mara got Eli out through the kitchen casement once I broke the sash. Then I went back upstairs alone with the can of paint thinner I'd been using on trim and poured it across the nursery floor, into the torn cavity, over the curtains, under the crib we hadn't even had time to assemble fully. I didn't think about the legality. I didn't think about insurance. I lit one of the long fireplace matches we kept in the hall drawer and dropped it. The fire took fast, hungry in that dry old room. I was down the stairs before the smoke hit the ceiling. By the time I got outside, flames were breathing out of the nursery windows I'd shattered. The covered mirrors in the downstairs hall flashed once in the firelight before the smoke hid them. Mara and Eli were already in the car. I left the folder of clippings on the hood because I wanted there to be evidence for whoever came after. We never went back. The police found the safe remains, the envelopes, enough for an investigation that mostly stayed vague in the papers. Historic property. Human remains not conclusively linked. Ongoing review of archival disappearances. That kind of language. Our family stayed with Mara's mother for 6 weeks, then moved into a bright rental with cheap carpet and boring walls and doors that behaved like doors. Eli stopped whispering that name after a while. Mara sleeps with the baby monitor off unless the baby is actually sick. I still wake some nights hearing small hard things striking wood in slow little runs. What I can't answer is who first built Bellwether House to work that way, or whether they built only one. Sometimes I drive through older neighborhoods and catch myself looking at deep porches and lace trim and thinking about hidden safes behind nursery paper. About homes sold as opportunities. About families like mine, practical enough to want more space and hopeful enough to believe a beautiful old house is just a beautiful old house. The last thing I took from that place wasn't a document or a keepsake. It was Eli's sock from by the umbrella stand. I found it in my coat pocket the next morning, and when I shook it out over the motel sink, 2 tiny white teeth fell into the porcelain like they had been waiting for us to finish moving in.